The jungle whispered death in every direction. Princess Sithkai crouched on the thick branch of a bloodroot tree, her 6 violet eyes scanning the underbrush. The scent of freshly spilled Gorfang blood burned her nostrils. This was wrong. No one killed a Gorfang. Not without an army. And yet, something had. A shuffling noise. A figure emerged from the shadows, the human. He was covered in blood. Not just his own, but the Gorfang's, black and steaming where it splattered across his pale flesh. His breathing was heavy but controlled, his muscles coiled like a predator ready to strike again. In his hand, he held a crude blade, fashioned from the beast's own bones. And in the other? A strip of cooked Gorfang flesh. Sithkai swallowed hard, her heart hammering in her chest. The Vorkai warriors behind her stirred uneasily, gripping their spears. None of them had ever seen anything like this. The human took a slow bite, chewing deliberately, before turning his piercing gaze in their direction. He didn't just sense them. He knew they were watching. And worse, he didn't care. Sithkai stood, stepping forward onto a lower branch. The jungle rustled beneath her movement, leaves shifting against her armor. The human smirked. "Gonna keep hiding out there, princess, or you gonna come try some?" His voice was deep, rough, with that unnatural earthborn confidence. He didn't sound like prey. Sithkai's claws twitched at her sides. "You defile the apex." The human shrugged, tossing another piece of roasted meat into his mouth. "Tastes fine to me." A murmur of horror rippled through her warriors. The Vorkai had spent generations hiding from these creatures. Their cities were fortresses, their lives dictated by fear of the Gorfangs. And now here stood a single, soft-bodied alien, eating one. Sithkai leapt down from the tree, landing in a crouch just a few feet from him. The human didn't flinch. He was watching her like she was the prey. Her voice was steady, but her stomach churned. "How did you kill it?" The human grinned, rolling his shoulders as he gestured toward the carcass. "Studied it. Learned how it moves. Set a trap. Wore it down. Stabbed it in the brain. Simple, really. Simple. Simple?" Sithkai's mandibles clicked in disbelief. This was impossible. Even their strongest warlords had never managed to bring down a Gorfang without hundreds of casualties. She stepped closer, studying him. The human was injured, deep gashes along his arms and torso, but he was still standing. He had fought a Gorfang alone, killed it, and then had the audacity to eat it. He had done the impossible. The Vorkai warriors behind her stirred, their unease growing into something more dangerous. Fear. Her second-in-command, Vorkai General Urkith, took a step forward, his spear lowering toward the human. "This is heresy. This is an affront to the natural order. The human must die." Sithkai turned her head sharply, holding up a hand. "No." Urkith's mandibles twitched in anger. "He has defiled the apex. This must not be allowed." The human chuckled, tossing his bone knife from one hand to the other. "You really want to try it?" Urkith snarled and lunged. It was over in less than a breath. The human sidestepped, twisted, grabbed Urkith's wrist, and in one violent motion drove his own spear straight through the warrior's gut. The Vorkai froze. Urkith choked, his body spasming as the human yanked the blade free, letting him collapse to the jungle floor. Isaac exhaled, wiping the blood on his pants. "Huh. Thought he'd last longer." The Vorkai warriors stepped back, gripping their weapons but too afraid to strike. The jungle was silent. Only the human stood tall. Sithkai felt her throat tighten. She had never seen a Vorkai fall so fast in combat. The human had moved like a predator, fast, efficient, without hesitation. She finally understood. The Vorkai had always assumed humans were weak. Soft. Flesh-bound. Inferior. But they were wrong. The Gorfangs were never the real apex predators. Humans were. Sithkai took a slow breath and turned to her warriors. "Restrain him." The human snorted, tossing his knife to the ground. Not gonna fight back? Zithkai met his gaze, her voice calm but firm. You are coming with us to the High Matriarch. She will decide what to do with you. The human smirked. Hope she likes a good story. The Vorkai warriors hesitated but moved in, shackling him with energy restraints before dragging him toward their fortress city. As they walked, Zithkai stole one last glance at the dead Gorfang behind them, its lifeless body sprawled across the jungle floor. A monster they had feared for centuries. A monster now reduced to a meal. And suddenly, the Vorkai's gods didn't seem so powerful anymore. The High Matriarch's throne room was a place of silence, a temple of fear carved from black stone and reinforced by centuries of caution. It was here that the Vorkai had gathered, their warlords standing in rigid lines, their violet eyes fixed on the bound human at the center of the chamber. The scent of blood still clung to him, and though he stood in shackles, he did not look defeated. Isaac Rourke tilted his head, scanning the room with quiet amusement. You all look nervous, he said. The silence thickened. The High Matriarch's voice was sharp, cold. You mock us while in chains, human? Isaac exhaled, rolling his shoulders against the restraints. You think these mean something? He lifted his arms slightly, the energy shackles pulsing dimly against his skin. You think binding my hands changes the fact that I already did the impossible? The Vorkai warlords shifted uneasily. They had seen the corpse of the Gorfang. They had seen what he had done. You defiled the apex, the matriarch continued, her voice edged with restrained fury. You disrupted the natural balance of this world. Isaac barked a short laugh. Natural balance? You mean the one where you all hide in your pretty little walls while those things run the place? Sounds less like balance and more like a bad deal. A sharp hiss rippled through the council. Zithkai stepped forward before the matriarch could respond, her voice steadier than she expected. Tell me, human. Why did you do it? Isaac turned his gaze to her, his expression shifting. He saw the curiosity behind her words, the crack in the foundation of her beliefs. Because I had to, he said simply. Because I refused to die in a world where the only rule is fear. The matriarch's mandibles twitched in irritation. You believe yourself superior to us, to this world? You think your kind is greater than the apex? Isaac held her stare, unflinching. You don't get it, do you? He took a slow step forward, and the warlords visibly tensed, hands tightening around their weapons. The apex isn't some monster lurking in the jungle. It's not the thing with the biggest teeth or the strongest hide. He leaned forward, voice dropping to something almost primal. The apex is the one that learns. The one that adapts. The one that refuses to accept weakness as a way of life. The chamber seemed to darken under the weight of his words. You've spent centuries fearing these things, Isaac continued, his voice unwavering. You've built your lives around avoiding them, running from them, calling them gods because it's easier than fighting back. But I'm telling you right now. His eyes burned with something terrifyingly certain. They are just beasts. And beasts can be hunted. The silence that followed was suffocating. The matriarch studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, she rose from her throne, towering above him. You have spoken like a warrior. But words mean nothing without proof. Isaac smirked. Good. I prefer actions anyway. The matriarch's voice rang through the hall. If you are as strong as you claim, then you will not fear a challenge. Isaac exhaled sharply, rolling his shoulders. All right, what's the game? Zithkai's stomach twisted. She knew what was coming. The Void Maw, the matriarch declared. The greatest of the Gorfangs. The one even our greatest warlords could not defeat. You will be taken to the Abyssal Valley. If you return, alive, then we will listen to your words. If not. Her mandibles twitched into something resembling a smirk. You will die knowing that you are nothing more than prey after all. A low murmur rippled through the warlords, their disbelief shifting into something else, anticipation. Isaac grinned, and for the first time, there was something truly unsettling about it. "You just signed that thing's death warrant," he said. The chamber erupted into chaos. Cries of outrage. Some warlords demanding his immediate execution, others fascinated by the challenge. Zithkai stared at him, unsure if she was witnessing insanity or something far worse. The matriarch lifted a hand, silencing the room. "You leave at dawn." Isaac nodded once. "Hope you're all hungry. I plan to bring back enough meat for everyone." Zithkai saw it then, the shift in the room. The Vorkai had never considered the idea that a human could be a predator. But now the doubt had begun to spread. Isaac Rourke wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting for an idea. And if he won, the Vorkai's entire way of life would crumble. The abyssal winds howled through the valley, carrying the scent of decay and blood. The ground beneath Isaac's boots was uneven, torn apart by the massive claws of the beast that ruled this wasteland. The Vorkai war party had taken him as far as they dared, leaving him at the edge of the hunting grounds where Voidmaw waited. He cracked his neck and exhaled, scanning the terrain. Jagged rock formations loomed on either side, creating natural bottlenecks. A dried riverbed cut through the valley floor, its cracked surface lined with deep claw gouges. Every instinct in his body screamed that something was watching. Zithkai stood at a safe distance, her gaze unreadable. "It is not too late to turn back, human. No one would fault you for fearing what is to come." Isaac chuckled, adjusting the makeshift armor he had pieced together from Gorfong bones. "Fear's a funny thing. It only controls you if you let it." She studied him for a moment, then turned to the warriors standing behind her. "If he survives, we witness history. If he dies, we confirm what we have always known." Isaac smirked. "Yeah? Let's see how that works out for you." The ground trembled. A low, guttural growl reverberated through the valley, rolling like thunder. Zithkai tensed. "It knows you are here." Isaac rolled his shoulders. "Good. Saves me the trouble of looking for it." Then the shadows moved. A monstrous shape emerged from the darkness, its massive bulk shifting with terrifying grace. Voidmaw was unlike any Gorfon Isaac had ever seen. Its body was twice the size of the one he had previously killed, its black carapace gleaming like obsidian, jagged ridges along its spine pulsing with a sickly bioluminescence. Its eyes, slitted in deep crimson, locked onto him with a cold, predatory intelligence. Isaac grinned. "Well, aren't you a big ugly bastard?" Voidmaw charged. Isaac barely had time to dodge, rolling to the side as the beast's claws carved deep trenches into the ground where he had stood. He hit the dirt, coming up fast, gripping the spear he had fashioned from the last Gorfang's bones. The Vorkai watching from the ridge whispered in disbelief. No one had ever survived Voidmaw's first charge. Isaac didn't hesitate. He moved, fast, weaving between the rock formations, forcing the monster into tighter spaces where its immense bulk worked against it. He needed time, to study its movements, to find an opening. The beast slammed its tail into the ground, sending a shockwave through the valley. Isaac was thrown off balance for half a second, long enough. Voidmaw lunged. A blur of motion. A shadow swallowing the light. Isaac barely escaped death, twisting his body just as Voidmaw's mandibles snapped shut inches from his head. The Vorkai warriors gasped. Zithkai watched, heart pounding against her ribs. The human was still alive. Isaac hit the ground in a roll, bringing his spear up as he did. He drove it hard against the Gorfang's underbelly, only for it to snap like a twig against the creature's armored hide. "Figures," he muttered, discarding the useless weapon. Voidmaw roared, the sound vibrating through his bones. Isaac had no illusions about this fight. This wasn't going to be a clean kill. This was going to be a war of attrition. The Vorkai had always feared the beast. They had never studied it. Never tried to understand its weaknesses. But Isaac? Isaac had been watching. Every movement. Every shift in its stance. Every moment it hesitated before striking. It bled. It breathed. It could die. The beast lunged again, and this time, Isaac was ready. He sidestepped, but instead of retreating, he ran toward it, closing the distance faster than it expected. With a gritted snarl, he threw his weight onto its side, gripping the ridges of its armored plating and hauling himself onto its back. The Vorkai warriors cried out in disbelief. No one had ever done this. Voidmaw thrashed, trying to shake him off, but Isaac held on, using the jagged spines along its back for leverage. "Come on, big guy," he growled through gritted teeth. "Let's dance." The beast bucked, its massive frame colliding with a rock formation, trying to crush him against it. Isaac let go at the last second, dropping down, landing on the beast's forelimb and driving his last blade deep into the joint where the armor was weakest. Voidmaw screamed. The Vorkai warriors staggered back. It had never made a sound like that before. Isaac ripped the blade free, black ichor spurting from the wound, and leapt clear before Voidmaw could retaliate. It stumbled. Just slightly. But Isaac saw it. He grinned. It could be hurt. Zithkai felt something deep in her gut, something foreign, something terrifying. For the first time, she wondered if the human might actually win. Voidmaw whirled, eyes burning with unfiltered rage, its injuries fueling its fury. Isaac cracked his neck, tightening his grip on his remaining weapons. "Round 2, he muttered. Then he charged. The air was thick with the stench of blood and burning flesh. Isaac crouched low, muscles coiled, watching as Voidmaw circled him, massive claws gouging deep trenches into the ground. The beast's wound still bled from where he had driven his blade into the joint, but it wasn't enough. "Not yet." Zithkai's voice carried from the ridge above, barely above a whisper. "He still stands." A Vorkai warlord scoffed. "Not for long. The apex is toying with him." Isaac wiped a streak of Gorfong blood from his brow, rolling his shoulders. "All right, you ugly bastard, let's see how smart you really are." Voidmaw charged again, but this time Isaac didn't dodge. He ran toward it, his sudden movement throwing the beast off for a split second. That was all he needed. He dropped low, sliding under the monster's lunging strike, kicking off the ground and scrambling up its side before it could react. His hands found purchase on the jagged spines along its neck. It thrashed, roaring in fury, trying to shake him off. "Not this time," Isaac growled. He reached for the last of his explosive charges, ripping it from his belt and jamming it deep into the open wound he had made earlier. His fingers worked quickly, priming the detonation sequence, knowing he had seconds before the beast reacted. Voidmaw lurched, slamming its massive body against a rock face, trying to crush him. Isaac barely managed to push off, rolling away as the detonation countdown ticked down. 3, 2. The explosion tore through the valley like a cannon blast. Voidmaw shrieked as a massive chunk of its armored plating was blown away, exposing raw, pulsing muscle beneath. Isaac was already moving. He grabbed the largest bone shard from the debris, hefting it like a spear, and charged straight at the exposed flesh. Zithkai could barely breathe. No one had ever seen Voidmaw wounded like this. Isaac let out a feral roar, bringing the jagged bone spear down with everything he had, driving it into the beast's exposed heart. Voidmaw convulsed, its entire body seizing as a choked, guttural sound tore from its throat. Its crimson eyes, once filled with pure hunger, flickered, then faded. It collapsed. The Vorkai warriors stood frozen in shock. Zithkai's chest heaved. Isaac staggered, dropping to one knee, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His body screamed in pain, but he only had enough energy left to chuckle. "Yeah, that's what I thought." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then came the whispers. "The apex is dead. A human did this?" The Vorkai warlords, once so sure of his death, now stood in stunned disbelief. Isaac slowly got to his feet. "So, do I get a prize for this, or is proving your gods are just oversized stakes enough?" Zithkai stepped forward, eyes still wide. "You killed it. You hunted the unkillable. Isaac grinned. And now I'm going to eat it. The gasps from the Vorkai were almost louder than the explosion had been. The matriarch's voice rang out from the ridge. Impossible. Isaac turned to her, his smirk never fading. Nothing's impossible. Just takes the right mindset. The Vorkai warlords began murmuring, their once rigid certainty starting to fracture. Isaac dragged his blade through the Gorfang's still warm flesh, carving out a thick slab of meat, tossing it onto the smoldering debris. The fire sizzled as the flesh began to sear. You lot spend your whole lives afraid, he said, voice carrying through the valley. Afraid of the beasts outside your walls. Afraid of fighting back. Afraid of change. He flipped the meat over, letting the fire char the surface. But fear is a choice. Zithkai watched in fascinated horror as he took the first bite. And then, she took a step forward. The Vorkai gasped as she knelt, took a piece of the cooked Gorfang flesh, and lifted it to her mouth. She hesitated only for a second. Then she bit down. The silence was deafening. The High Matriarch's expression darkened, but she said nothing. One by one, the Vorkai warriors stepped forward. Some hesitated. Some trembled. But eventually, they followed. Isaac grinned as the first warlord took a bite, then another, until the once unthinkable had become real. He had done more than just kill the apex. He had changed them. Zithkai wiped the blood from her lips, eyes locked on his. You have rewritten our laws in a single night. Isaac tossed the bone aside, stretching. Yeah? What are you gonna do about it? She bared her fangs in something that might have been a smile. Learn.